Okay, so in this video we're going to look at creating objects which can be collected and also objects that will reduce the health score of our character. So the first thing we'll do is put collectible objects in the scene. In this tutorial we're going to use some spheres, but in your own games of course you can customize them and use whichever objects you like. So the first thing we'll do is put a sphere in the scene by going to Game Object, 3D Object, Sphere. And you'll see it appear in the scene view. Now it's a little bit oversized, so if you just reduce the scale like that using this widget here, and I think we'll also just make it a little bit higher. And I think it would be nice if we add some colour to our collectible objects. So to do that, you'll see that in the project window you have a materials folder. Double click on the materials folder, and then inside the materials folder right click, create material, and we'll just call it after the colour. So I'm going to have a yellow sphere. To change the colour, just go to the albedo, find a nice yellow, and then you can just drag that material onto the sphere to colour it. Now the next thing that we need to do is make the sphere a prefab. So if you just drag the sphere into, for now we'll just drag it into assets, and you'll see, sorry, that was from a previous Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is make our sphere a prefab. So we can do that by dragging the sphere into the assets folder, and you'll see that it creates a prefab, and we know it's a prefab because it has this blue cube next to it now. And the script that we pulled in for the player controller has all the relevant code that we need for collectible objects and enemy objects, but we do need to do a few things in the project. The first thing that we need to do is actually go to the sphere, and we need to add a new tag. We need to tag it in a particular way. So up here in the inspector view you'll see that there's tag. If you select that and go to add tag, the plus sign here, and just type in pick up, and if you go back to your sphere you can now add that tag pick up. And it's important that while you're doing this, within the sphere collider you also tick this box here called is trigger. Now if we press play, the hope is that when our character runs into that object it disappears, and what we'll do later is we'll actually add a UI so you can see how many objects you've collected. But that's the basis of our collectible object. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create an enemy object, an object that when you run into it, it takes points off your health. And our enemy objects will be basic shapes. I think we could make them a cube. So we go to Game Object, 3D Object, Cube. We bring a cube into the scene, just as we did before the sphere. It's a little bit oversized, so we'll make it smaller. And we'll also add a colour to the cube. So we'll go back into our Materials folder, right-click, Create, Material, and we'll call that Red. And then in the albedo, just click on a nice red colour and bring it onto the cube. And very much in the same way as we did with the sphere, what we'll do is we'll just add, well, first of all we'll make it a prefab, so we'll just drag it into the assets to create a prefab. And what we need to do now is tag it again, but we need to tag it as an enemy object. So you need to go back into tags, add tag, and then add it enemy, an enemy tag. So if you click back on your sphere, you can now select enemy, and at the same time, just as we did with the collectibles, you need to make sure that it's trigger. And actually you'll see as I've done that I've been changing the sphere. So I'll put the sphere back onto pick up, and I'll go to the cube and I'll make the cube an enemy, and I will select is trigger. Now what should happen is when the character runs through this red object, it shouldn't disappear, because an enemy doesn't just disappear because you run into it. So let's have a look and see if that happens. Oops, so that's our a little bit hard from this angle. Okay, so let's just see if that happens. Now what should happen is when the character runs into the red object, or the red cube, the enemy shouldn't disappear as it does with the sphere, because an enemy doesn't just disappear because you run into it. You know, I'm not actually saying that unless it's a bomb or something and it disappears, but these particular enemies are not going to. So the idea is that when you hit play and you run into your cube, it should be that your character actually just runs through it, which seems to be happening. So your character will just run through it, and although we can't see because we don't yet have the UI, what should be happening is that every time the character runs through that, it's deducting a health point until you lose. So what we'll do in the next video is we'll create a UI so we can actually see how many objects we collected and how our health is being reduced by enemy objects.